Hello, everybody. Today we are welcoming back Christa Smith. And you may have heard her episode on the podcast before. And if you haven't, we'll link it down below. But Christa has worked with us at the Crohns and Colitis Dietitians in the past. Christa is a board certified sports dietitian and personal trainer. And she is here to talk about all things gut health and sports today. Christa, welcome back to the Gut Feelings podcast.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I'm so excited.
Welcome back.
We are excited to have you as well. I'm wondering, Christa, I guess, in the last little bit since you've been on the podcast, what have you been up to?
Just having babies. I did have a baby, one baby.
More than
and
one.
yeah.
Babies?
Yeah, babies. And pursuing my board certification in sports dietetics, trying to be outside a lot, trying to eat more plants. Yeah, trying to find a hobby. I feel like that's always something, but yeah, that's what I've been up to.
It's almost like you took an extended maternity leave or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
But wait, I will say in Canada, that's like an appropriate maternity leave.
Wow.
Right? Because there's some individuals that take, 12 to 16 months in Canada.
Wow.
Which would be so great.
That is so appropriate and amazing.
Yeah.
I love that.
I feel like my brain is just now kind of starting to come back online. So yeah.
Interesting.
It's been 13 months.
That is an interesting thing. And Christa, with your sports certification, how long did that take you, if you don't mind me asking?
That took a solid 4 years. Yeah. Yeah, I started in 2019. You have to get 2,000 practice hours under another dietitian. They have to sign off on those hours. So kind of similar to your undergrad stuff. And then, so started working on those hours in 2019 and started just kind of learning and, just getting some reps with the content and things like that and teaching and whatnot. And then sat for the boards in October of 23.
Amazing.
It's amazing. A lot of dedication.
Yeah, that's a lot of hours. I remember you working on some when you were with us.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was just wow, once you're set in on that, it can take years to get that certification. That's more than getting your RD, just about.
I know. It's crazy.
It's incredible. So I remember you and I met before you started working with us, and we did an Instagram live. We started talking about gut health, and wasn't it on iron? I believe we did a deep dive on iron in the very beginning.
Yep, we did.
And along the way, I think while you're working with us, you really started to kind of merge these two worlds because you were coming in from a sports background, and then you were interested in IBD. And then what we started to see while you were here was that there was a lot of IBD athletes that started to find us out and reach out for some support. And we started to see this unique scenario that an IBD athlete experiences, which is you have huge demand from the sport, obviously, that you need a sports dietitian to guide you through to really enhance your performance. But then you also have this huge demand from IBD. And it's honestly, I've said this before, it's incredible. IBD athletes are next level. The fact that we can be able to perform at often at such a disadvantage in some ways than the regular athlete, and so many unique challenges that it really requires this person that can exist in both worlds, that can understand the uniqueness of both. So I guess if you want to share a little bit about that journey to figuring out why that interests you so much, and how you got to that point of, you came back this time and were like, okay, I really want to focus in on the thing I'm so interested in. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
I do. I love both worlds, and probably life experience has shaped that more than anything. Starting out in sport and loving sport, I grew up played in college, and then have always I played golf in college. Yes. And I've always just considered myself an athlete. After college, I did a bunch of triathlon-esque type of things and training and whatnot. And then, yeah, so I still kind of think of myself as one. And then being diagnosed myself with IBD, ulcerative colitis in 2020, coming out of or in the middle of my third pregnancy, which requires you to be an athlete just generally going through pregnancy, labor and delivery, postpartum. And I think even now, as I've worked in, sport world more and more, like I really am seeing all of us to some degree. We are all athletes. And so because we're all kind of striving for a performance metric at some level, depending on maybe you're a stay-at-home mom and you need to be able to be present and with the children and playing, whatever your body, whatever it requires of your body in that moment. Or, maybe we're thinking more tactical type of environments, firefighters, police officers, like those are really intense environments, or military, or whatever the case may be. So maybe our job requires more of our bodies than a performance demand. We all have performance needs and desires throughout the day and throughout our lives. And so that has been really fascinating to kind of think through, and also help optimize or help, bring to a more of a gut health picture. And in all the gut health spaces, they always define a healthy gut as free of disease. And I feel like sometimes that inherently excludes us, and personally, I don't ever subscribe to that, because I think that we can work toward a healthy gut even in the face of disease. And so these two worlds kind of colliding in those ways is really exciting. It's always something to learn and always a way to grow.
I had forgotten about that until you said it, that the terminology that we use in dietetics, it is very exclusive. I can remember in school, it's like, even when you talk about like recommended daily allowances, it's specifically for the healthy population. It's not for people with a gut condition.
Right.
Which is already, we're like, well, what is it for, someone with IBD? Is it different? And also what you said of, yeah, normal healthy gut is without disease. It's crazy to think that that there is no word for like what is a healthy gut in somebody who has IBD. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can we make up our own word for it?
We need one. Yes.
Yeah, put your suggestions.
We need a
Let us know.
spectrum.
We do, honestly. Yeah.
I do. I want to go back to what you said too about how we're all athletes. I
Yeah.
think I have said that to patients before, and I think they don't believe me, but it's true. I can really relate to what you said about how once you've been an athlete before, your brain, it just stays that way. You just always feel like you're an athlete who's eventually training for something when you've done it enough hours.
Right.
And I was a runner in college and after college, and can very much relate to that. And I've never felt like, I never really related to that statement of everyone's an athlete until when I stopped being an athlete and I realized, oh, it's the same thing. It's just a different context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same mindset, same way of thinking, same way of approaching it. Just like now it's a little different. Now it's, I want to feel good when I go for a walk, or I want to
Right.
feel good so I can play with my kids, or so I feel energized at work. What does that look like?
Yeah. I love that. And that is so easy to incorporate everyone into.
Yeah.
Krista, I guess like one of the things I'm thinking about is, okay, so all of us, of course, interact with people who have IBD. What is really like happening in the gut
Yeah.
when you are an athlete, you're super active and things are not going well inside the gut? Like you're having all of these symptoms. Can you kind of explain like
Yeah.
why are these things coming about? And I mean, maybe later on, like what are some, top 3
Strategies.
tips, yeah, that you recommend for people to help calm things down?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. And first of all, the cascade of events that happens in the body when we initiate exercise is true of everyone. Like this will be happening in professional athletes free of disease just as much as it would be happening within the IBD population. So at any rate, we have, a couple of pathways happening. Like we have foundationally, we have a shunting of blood flow away from the GI tract because that is not a priority. Whenever we initiate exercise, we have to get that oxygenated blood to the working muscle, heart, lungs. We've got to be, and we've got to get it, perfusion, and we got to get it to the extremities to dissipate heat. And so the GI system naturally lack of blood flow, and it slows down, and lack of circulation. And so the priority of digestion no longer is there. And so some strategies that would obviously impact that is not having very much in the system, or it have already been digested and broken down and utilized by that point. And so, just kind of thinking through how that might happen. We also have some hormones that are at play that kind of slow gastric emptying as well. And so a lot of our strategies are going to be improving that. And we also have to kind of factor in some environmental things too, because if we're obviously going to be creating heat, as the body kind of warms up and you're exercising, and obviously that creates heat as we create energy. And so if core temperature rises, and that's going to impact motility within the gut as well. So a lot of our strategies aim to either optimize or just minimize some of the impacts of those things. So we always recommend like low fat, low fiber, low protein in the 1 to 2 hours prior to exercise. So that's just 1 to 2 hours prior, staying really well hydrated. And so if you're doing low fat, low fiber, low protein, that's obviously going to require you to rely on simple carbohydrates. And so that's what carbohydrate and fluids really, you kind of think of them as kind of like cushioning the GI system. So aiming for appropriate carbohydrates and enough fluids going into exercise to kind of minimize the impact. So we're minimizing not only some of the perfusion that can happen, but also just providing the body, like we don't have to make up as much of those needs during and after. A lot of times there, can be things related to mechanical issues. So just lots of, like, if you're running and there's lots of jostling, the intestines are taking a lot of impact because those muscles are holding up all of the intestines. And with all of the jostling that can happen, we can see just more bleeding, more pain, that kind of thing. And so not overtraining, not having too many intense exercise bouts in a row, minimizing duration when we can. Kind of depends on, what the demands of your sport or whatever the case may be. Sometimes that's easier to do than others. Yeah. So does that kind of answer your question to start?
Yeah, no, it totally does. That was a lot of great information. Ashley, if you want to help me summarize too. So like, first and foremost, Christa, when people are more active, their bodies are not focusing on digestion. They're focusing on like, okay, go to the extremities. So your legs and your arms, because those are the things that are working the most. So blood flow is going there.
Right.
That's a big piece. So then your body's obviously not focused on digestion. So if you were to eat something super high in fat, super high in fiber, a gigantic meal, and your body's not in that optimal primed oxygenated zone, it's going to be a hot mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Which probably is why,
and all of those, like,
focus on what you said, right? Low protein, simple carbohydrates, low fat, low fiber.
Yeah. Because fiber, protein, and fat, they take longer to digest. They're, they cause a lot of like expansion to the stomach, right? And a lot of times, like, that can even cause some symptoms sometimes, right? Like if we feel some of that can increase motility, and we might see diarrhea just even generally. So if we're adding on any form of, like, especially high intensity movement, that's really going to cause either reflux or, pretty intense diarrhea.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you too, and I don't know if we know the answer to this or not, but it would seem to me that maybe there could be a big positive to diverting blood flow too. Are there any positives to that temporary? I mean, I know there's positives to exercise, obviously. We get tons of benefits from it, but are there positives to even blood flow being diverted temporarily?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind, and I'll be curious what came to your guys' mind, but the hormonal changes I was talking about was that increase of sympathetic response. So like, if you truly are, like running from a bear, if you truly are in trouble and you've got that increased sympathetic response, that fight or flight, like, yeah, you want it, and your body will prioritize movement at any cost because we have to be able to get away. Like, that's how we've, been able to like survive for so long. We've got to be able to like get away from any sort of threat. And so, yeah, that would be a huge advantage. You stop digestion or really significantly decrease digestion so that your body can move in a situation where you would need to.
I almost saw it like it's like your gut's resting a little bit.
Yeah.
It's diverting. I mean, I don't know if there's any research on that, but I do think it's an interesting thought. I mean, I know that we get so many benefits from it's like a stressor, like exercise is a stressor. You get this, it's oxidative stress, but good because you get all of these benefits after where your body's in recovery mode.
Oh, that's such a good segue. I have this like beautiful schematic in my head from a paper. Yeah, there's a paper that talks about this hormetic effect with exercise, like that Goldilocks principle. We don't want too much or too little, especially with intensity or duration. And we see the same thing in IBD. Like if we're completely sedentary, it's not helpful. If we're, consistently going above 60% VO2 max and we're consistently going above like 2 hours of duration, like that can sometimes be part of the issue.
Question. Okay, so what do you mean when you say when you go above 60% VO2 max?
Yeah, so that's our maximal oxygen uptake, and that would kind of feel like pretty considerable effort. You could still talk, but it would be kind of hard during in your efforts, but it would feel hard. But you would still have more in the tank to kind of push, but it's getting up there. Yeah.
So kind of like moderate exercises, like be a moderate effort.
Yeah, kind of pushing vigorous. Yeah.
Christa, like how do you coach someone through that?
Good question. Like, give me an example.
I think one of the things that I maybe hear from clients or even think of like myself sometimes too is, I guess there's like a few things I could talk about here. One, I sometimes think like, okay, am I more tired because I worked out more? Or was it because of my IBD because I'm just tired because I worked out more? Did I get a bad sleep? Was it my period affected in there too, right? So you have all these things at play, and food too. Did I eat enough? I guess like, maybe those are some of the things you think of when you're coaching someone through the fatigue, or maybe when to push them or when to slow down a little bit or back off. Are there any other things at play to be mindful of for an athlete listening?
That's such a good point. And you're right. It does take a little bit of combing through. Okay, did we kind of basically almost like a checklist? Did we hit these markers? And if not, where were we kind of off? I think primarily some of the top questions that I'm going to think through is, okay, are we do we have kind of like a training block that we're working through? What is training looking like? Are we appropriately resting? Are we bringing intensity and duration down appropriately? Do we have really appropriate recovery strategies? Are we prioritizing carbohydrates and protein and fluids coming out of our activity? Ideally within 90 minutes or so, 60 to 90 minutes. So are we recovering well? Are we kind of prioritizing recovery foods, polyphenols, omega-3s, things like that in our meal times? And then outside of that too, like, how's our IBD doing? Are we kind of pushing too hard generally? Is our IBD already, we're increasing symptoms? Are we sleeping well? Those are kind of the top things that I'm going to be thinking through. Did I miss anything?
Well, I could see what would really complicate that, just coming at it from strictly IBD, is you add in there that people have experienced pain with food. And maybe they're like, ooh, I feel terrible with brown rice. Like, or they have some significant fears. And that can greatly limit greatly limit the options, greatly limit a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess how do you navigate that with somebody when there's this significant fear or maybe even diagnosable ARFID or
Hmm.
just, avoidant restrictive
Yeah.
type behaviors?
I'm always going to be like prioritizing adequacy. So that's going to come before any sort of like optimization, like the
And
perfect choice. Like
explain that for people too,
yeah,
what that means.
I got to make sure that you're eating enough. Don't really care like if that's the brown rice or the salmon or like we need to be getting enough, and that's the important factor. And so yeah, that's always going to be at the base of what we're talking about. um Remind me of what you asked, though. It's gone, it left me.
Sorry.
No, it was
I was asking, can you explain how significant fears and significant restriction can impact the IBD athlete or the IBD everyday working out, you know?
yeah. And it does, it makes such a, like, when you're scared to eat the food, it it's awful. And it that is usually like, we got to have enough energy to be able to not only get through our day, but especially if we're going to add on exercise, we've just got to have enough. And if we're going to particularly restrict, like fermentable foods, especially, that I feel like that happens a lot, they're going to be primarily carbohydrates, which is usually what we're relying on, as our energy source in most activity. And so it's just really easy to inadvertently underfuel. Sometimes we're doing that knowingly, but it's just so easy to do that. And so again, going back to adequacy, like just making sure that we're getting enough. So what are we comfortable with incorporating that kind of meet the guidelines? So like if it's a simple carbohydrate, or if we're trying to add more complex carbs to our total fueling picture throughout the day, what are we comfortable with doing? If that is white rice right now, okay, that's totally fine. That's what we're comfortable with. Or where are some other ways that maybe we can increase, diversity in plants and diversity in fibers? But starting with, where are you at? What are you comfortable with? And then moving up from there. But it really does, again, it goes back to like, we got to get meet baseline needs, and then kind of like challenging the fear a little bit, very slowly. um yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And you and I were talking before this about how what's actually going on with somebody too when they're in that tricky spot. And I imagine you almost get there faster if you're an IBD athlete because you've got these huge expenditures,
Yeah.
um, it huge being huge with IBD, and then add on top of that huge expenditures with being an athlete. And so you
Yeah.
almost get to that point of restriction a lot quicker. And can you explain at like what we were talking about earlier about how what's going on in the person's body and what the effects are of long term?
Like if we consistently restrict.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and it usually gets to this nasty cycle, right? Like we're afraid of some of the foods, so we just either inadvertently or we choose to restrict some of those. And then ultimately it slows down the gut, because we are going to lose some of that muscle tone, where there's not enough energy coming in. We do damage some of the gut lining, and just because we're consistently not having enough fuel coming in. And so that impacts motility. So we can see lots of constipation, we can see lots of reflux or gastroparesis, just because the actual intestines are slow. That peristalsis, that movement of the muscle is slow. And I feel like that happens so much and we don't really know what to attribute it to, but that can be kind of, your baseline. And then over time, gray matter in the brain actually shrinks. And so we have more rigidity, less flexibility. So not only with food choices, but also socially, we may be pulling away from eating socially, and having capacity to be able to do that. And it really does impact all other muscles and organ systems, to some degree. Like we can see mood disorders, we can see it impacting the heart, we can see impacting like temperature. So it's harder to regulate body temperature. So we'll see lots of coldness, generally, like feeling cold all the time, but cold extremities, trying to insulate internal organs as best we can in that conservation of energy. And so if you were to look at relative energy deficiency in sport, we have these great little infographics that talk about all the different body systems that are impacted, and just about every single one of them are on there. And so you might think of like the classic female athlete triad where loss of menses impacting bone, and that can very well happen. But a lot of times, we will see these other systems impacted maybe before menstruation ceases, or maybe before testosterone is impacted, or before we see a bone stress fracture, not healing. We might see these GI symptoms happen first because of that lack of intake.
Yeah. That's crazy to think about.
That's honestly what I was going to say. It's just a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as a practitioner, you kind of like have your detective hat on, like, okay, can we see patterns? Can we figure out where we're kind of missing the mark? And again, it's that adequacy piece. Like if you were thinking about a hierarchy of needs, that is at your baseline. And so any athlete listening or any active person listening, that really is the first step that we want to meet always, is making sure we have enough. And then we could think about, a balance of macronutrients, increasing fiber, increasing diversity, but only after we've met appropriate, adequate baseline needs.
I think that's what's great about being a dietitian too, is like being able to have the time and space and knowledge about this holistic picture to kind of be able to piece together all the things that are happening for that person. Whereas like I think on the other side, if you're only coming at it from a, with your GI or your provider who has 15 minutes with you, you might be tracing down all these different things like, oh wow, she lost her period, you go to the OB-GYN, there's bone issues going on, you go to get a DEXA scan. And so you're going all these different directions. And when actuality, if we were to get to this root of it all, it's simply we need more there to support the person so that they can come out of that.
It's so true. It's so true. I teach at our local university, and I'm teaching a lot of trainers, exercise scientists, that type of student. And my whole goal is like, this is when you refer out. This is when you start thinking, this is when your spidey senses need to go off. And this is like, ideally you would have this full, team of providers, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And so you might need to be the liaison between, so that you can refer out and make sure that the athlete gets the best care that they can get.
Yeah. I know we've all had to be that at some certain points. And I can particularly think about a few times with you when we've had to be that for a patient that, there's a lot of undertreated IBD patients, not even just athletes, but where you kind of are the investigator, essentially.
You are. Yeah. And I feel like we get that coordinator of care hat put on us quite often, but we do have the time and space a lot of times, and we can kind of help put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
It's fun. Feels like a challenge every time.
Yeah, and I think too, for people that are worried about that, because if I were thinking back to myself when I was in very restricted places, and not knowing the way out, a lot of these things can turn around. It's not a one-way ticket to way, way worse forever and ever, but you can have a turnaround, and it may often require working with someone to see that happen, because there's significant challenges with IBD where you might need somebody to guide you through it. You might need to do liquid nutrition for a while. There's all different ways of what that path could look like, but it's not as if you have to stay there forever.
It's so true. Yeah, so many of these are reversible situations. Outside of bone, that's the only thing may not be reversible.
Yeah, I guess that could be challenging, with the bone stuff. Now, when you were talking about restriction and how that impacts motility, I was thinking about people who are in that restricted category. We would definitely put them in that box, but maybe they experience diarrhea or throwing up.
Mm.
Could can can you bridge that gap of like how you can also have diarrhea or maybe throwing up due to that restriction or change in muscle tone?
Yeah, the things that come to mind, especially with vomiting, would be gastroparesis or even reflux. So you're just having things sit too long in the upper GI system, and they're not moving appropriately. And either that's, that's triggering vomiting. That's kind of what comes to mind there. And that could be directly related to lack of intake, and slower motility. With diarrhea, you guys will have to tell me if maybe I'm missing something here. Especially when you think about like chronic constipation, really severe constipation, and you have that kind of picture of overflow diarrhea and then coming back to a constipation picture and it kind of flip-flopping on you like that. Which again, a picture of severe constipation could be directly related to slower motility, obviously, and then like maybe lack of intake. Am I missing something on diarrhea that maybe you guys are thinking of?
And we could do a deeper dive on this and report back in the show notes, because sometimes we don't know or can't remember stuff, and that's just a part of
That's me all the time.
being a normal healthcare provider who but I know from my understanding, like with ARFID and restriction and stuff, is you have a fat pad in your digestive tract that is important for motility, and that combined with that slower motility can cause the vomiting. But I imagine if changes in muscle tone are happening, that's
Mm-hmm.
just messing with any kind of motility. So, if something's sitting there longer, could you have more expelling quickly too, just with the dysfunction
Yeah.
of that muscle tone?
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I was thinking particularly with exercise, just because I see this a lot. Some people don't experience that constipating picture. Like sometimes it is way more diarrhea. And sometimes it can be because of like a particular input. So if there's higher osmolality in a solution, a carbohydrate solution, or if there's just like more volume that comes in at a time, more fat, or whatever the case may be, that changes motility later on, down in the digestive tract. And so I'm just like, and then if you initiate exercise, in some people that causes that dumping, and you'll have like urgent diarrhea when it's literally just a change in the GI tract. It's not like a chronic thing. It's like a direct, effect of exercise or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I did find something on it while you're talking. Like I was mentioning, I think it's the muscle tone change overall that changes. It reduces peristaltic activity, which can lead to bacterial changes, like
Yeah.
maybe bacterial overgrowth in some cases, which we know if we're talking about small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, you can have methane dominant, you can have hydrogen dominant. Hydrogen dominant tends to show more like present more in a diarrhea type way. So I suppose it's just another chain event that you
Yeah.
can it can lead to faster transit, just based on the mechanisms happening, or it can lead to just the slowing up of it. So I guess
Yes.
that's the
That's
key
a better
point.
way of putting it.
Yeah, it just messes with that movement, because your gut really is like this. It's a muscle. We forget that it's a muscle.
You
So
do.
all things apply that would apply to any other muscle. Like with your muscles, you need electrolytes, number one,
Right.
for them to work properly, or otherwise you might see cramping, including magnesium, which can significantly impact your transit and the peristalsis. But it's
Yep.
basically these circular movements throughout the GI tract that are happening. And so if it's not working correctly, then it causes issues.
Yes. That's a good point too, with like it being a muscle and you can train it. I don't think we think about that often, but it's true. And you can train it to like take in more and better nutrition. So either before or during, if we have to do, if we need nutrition during activity or whatever, and then after, and we can increase tolerance, by way of better nutrition practices. We can train it.
Yeah, Danielle and I were just talking about that, or we did like a clip on Instagram on that. And I liked thinking of it like a muscle. You would train just like you would train for a sport, and because it's true. That's what we see in our practice all the time, is that we see these changes happening for people when they put in the time and they work on these little things, and it builds up and compounds just like an athlete would build their training.
That kind of goes back to our initial comments. Like, you can work toward progress, even if your musculature is a little bit diseased. That's okay. We can work toward a better version of that.
Yes, as baby steps, as Danielle always says. Yes. And I think too, like, listening to all of this, it's really cool to me to listen to the discussion around why or how certain things could happen in the gut or what impact certain things have on the gut. But I feel like it's also that hope with us discussing you can train, you can slowly add more to your diet. So those things can, if they're currently happening to you, they can lessen. And obviously working with a dietitian can be really helpful when it comes to that. But I guess if you're listening here, we don't expect you to fully comprehend and understand, like, if this happens, then this is going to happen, right? We want to focus on getting enough food in your day, enough fluids in your day, electrolytes, like what Ashley said, so that your gut can solely work on becoming the best that it can be given the circumstances that the individual's in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to that end, like, appropriate nutrition, like, does that for, like it allows your gut to optimally function. I know we're scared, or oftentimes we're really scared to eat and we're afraid of the symptoms that might happen, but we still need it, so finding ways to get it in that either reduce symptoms, alleviate some of the thoughts, the fears and things. Nutrition really is how we help it function the best that it can.
With that, Christa, our last question that I have on our agenda is, can you maintain good health with IBD and training like an athlete?
Good question. Yeah, you absolutely can. I think sometimes it may look different than what you're thinking, and it may not be how everyone else trains for a marathon, or how everyone else, whatever it is that you're trying to do. It may mean more breaks. It may mean more rest period. It may mean lower intensity. It may mean less duration, whatever the case may be. But yeah, we can thrive. We can train our guts to take in better and more nutrition. We can tolerate, more fiber over time, more plants over time. We can potentially increase the training if we want to, whatever the case may be, but it may just look different. But yeah, we can.
Yeah, and some real life examples of that. I think you and I have both seen lots of really cool things in our IBD athlete transformations. And of course, depending on where the athlete's at, the improvement's slightly different. Like, for example, I worked with a rower who saw I don't know if it was like a 5 or 10%, which is a lot for someone who's at the, top of their game, like they're a professional. As the further you go down in the professional route, the smaller the changes are going to be.
Yeah.
But I know in his case, he was able to see pretty significant changes with these small tweaks over time, like with getting enough food, the very basics, like getting enough, working on the iron and working on nutrients and getting those in check can make a huge difference. But what are do you have any things that come to mind that you're like, wow, that really shows the power of any cases that you can remember that really speak to that?
Yeah, I did have one ultra marathoner, which is challenging. right? That's a lot of time. That's kind of intense. And usually we're dealing with heat and stress, that's just a lot of stressors on the body. And then we add on IBD. So that's really challenging. But with her, we really work toward, again, meeting baseline needs, and really playing with the fiber. So figuring out what was tolerable and when we could placing the heavier fibers, in certain parts of the day, and then making sure that during the events, she was taking in appropriate fluids, electrolytes, carbohydrates. And at that point with ultras, you have to put in protein. So we really had to train the gut to be able to tolerate a lot of that. And then playing with flavors and textures and things. So we didn't have too much monotony, getting bored with the flavor profiles of things, not too much sweet or things like that. And we did not see, I was very proud because we didn't see an increase in symptoms. We kept things neutral, and we didn't have to, we didn't have to increase any other like medication interventions either. And we didn't lose weight, which was important. We didn't want to, by the end of that season, we didn't want any weight loss happening. Yeah. And so we were tolerating our nutrition, no increase in symptoms. She didn't not finish her event too. So I felt like that was a win.
Yeah, that is a win. I feel like you're right. Like, wins look very different for everybody. Like with runners, it might be not having runner's diarrhea.
Yeah.
Like at your racing event, that would have been
Being able
mine
to finish.
if I was working with you. That would have been mine. I'd come to you with that,
Right.
because there's so much stress going on with events too that can play into like your symptoms, and
yes,
so there's a lot of extra tools you might need. But yeah, it could look different for everybody. It could be expanding your diet, being able to eat a little bit more, hydrating well.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all your knowledge with everybody today. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're back with us. And if you're an IBD athlete and you're looking for some guidance, Christa is back and taking patients. So feel free to reach out.
I'm so excited. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.